in your workplace. I think that's really where this needs to be. We're not going to change Dianne Feinstein's opinions on firearms. We're not going to change Piers Morgan's opinions on firearms, right? So as much as I get in the media and I take every request for radio interview or whatever else, the issue is really a middle America grassroots kind of issue. And that's where this battle is best fought. So especially for that audience, I think that there are some talking points. I think there are some important ways to approach this that I have found to be very successful, that others have found to be very successful. And this is another thing that when I said, hey, what am I going to talk about? This was something that came up, again, by a lot of people who pay attention to what I'm doing. They say, this is something you've been doing a lot recently. Talk about that, because you've got a lot of leaders in the industry here, whether you're leaders in your local community or nationally. So these are some things that I think are important. These are the standards, right? These are the standard things that I hear people bring up most of the time. All right, these are the things that I hear gun people talking about a lot. And all of them are true and all of them are valid. But I don't know that people who aren't gun people really care, that it resonates with them. That remember I said at the beginning of this that we in our community look at talking points as a negative. Right? We see them as like the talking heads on the news that are just blah, 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 not even having a discussion, just saying what they want to say. I see these as our bad talking points. I see these as us just saying what we want to say, saying the same old thing, things that may not be compelling to anybody who doesn't know the history of the Second Amendment, people that don't know the difference between an assault weapon and a non-assault weapon, and who care of the statistics that say 3% of this. I don't think these are very compelling to middle America. And Dianne Feinstein isn't going to change her mind because we show her our version of the statistics versus her version. Does that make sense? So I'm not saying these are wrong. I'm just saying I think these aren't as compelling as some of the stuff we're going to talk about. Because we're dealing with Americans in the middle, right? The majority of Americans aren't diehard pro-gun or diehard anti-gun. They're probably pretty gun agnostic. They probably really don't have a passionate investment in either side. So getting them to rally around the Second Amendment, because if we lose the Second Amendment, it's a slippery slope to the First Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, the Fifth Amendment. The last time they heard any of that, other than the news coverage, was in 7th grade. So let's remember who we're talking to. We're not talking to people who know the difference between an assault weapon and an assault weapon. We're talking to just regular old people getting coffee or sitting in the stands next to us at the kids' game. I think this one's important. Our rights are already infringed. If you don't, does anybody not agree with that in this room? All right, if our rights are already infringed, does it make any sense to say, shall not be infringed? What part of that don't you understand? Right? It doesn't make any sense. If we know our rights are already infringed, going back to the first principle of the Second Amendment and trying to fight a fight that was fought in the 1700s doesn't make a lot of sense to me. We are a long way from shall not be infringed. So when people come to us and say, well, what about reasonable restrictions? We've had plenty of restrictions. Now, you're not going to find me on video saying the restrictions we have today are reasonable. Right? So I'd be all for changing a bunch of them. But what you will find me saying is sidestepping that question a little bit and saying, look, we're already infringed. We're not having an argument about free-for-all, nuclear submarines in my pool, bazookas on my shoulder, machine guns mounted in my grill of my car. That's not happening, right? Whether I think it's a good idea or not, that's not happening. Where we are today is there are a lot of restrictions on access to firearms. There are a lot of hoops and regulations people have to jump through to get firearms, especially a lot of the firearms that are sensationalized in the movies and in the media and the popular press. There's some states you can't even own certain types of guns. A lot of cities you can't own certain types of guns. Certain chiefs of police and sheriff's office and attorneys general won't let you have certain types of guns. There's a lot of restrictions already on our right to keep and bear arms. So if you want to talk about reasonable restrictions and meeting in the middle, let's remember we're a long way from the extreme pro-gun, Second Amendment, we can have whatever we want, don't infringe on our rights, don't tread on me bullshit. We're a long way from that. And when you just have that conversation in some way with the person at the coffee shop and you start explaining, and I'm not talking about how many laws did I cite? Gun Control Act, National Firearms Act. I don't have to do that. All I have to say is, look, man, I cannot pull a machine gun out of my trunk right now and sell it to you for $5 and call it good and high five. Like, that can't happen in the United States right now. And the fact that we are restricted, the fact that there are controls, the fact that there is a process, there is such a thing as a federally licensed firearm dealer, and that's who all of the sales of new guns have to go through, right? Now, I can say that, and that's not, is that misleading, the fact that there can be a private sale? I don't know. But I know that if I tell someone standing in a coffee shop, do you know that any firearm that's manufactured today has to be sold by someone who has a license from the federal government, and that there is going to be some kind of background check when that transfer happens? Most of them don't know that, because they're hearing about loopholes and blah, 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 this and that and the other thing, gun shows. So you can make a compelling argument that we're already infringed. Maybe you didn't know that as Middle America. We're not talking about Second Amendment, by golly. We're talking about, hey, there are already restrictions. Sir?
One thing I try to make, correct me if I'm wrong, the Constitution does not give us the right to keep and bear arms. We already had that. The Constitution means that the government's never going to try to take that away.
I think that goes back to this. It goes back to this constitutional argument, right? And we're not sitting in Philadelphia having a conversation about the way the country should be formed. And that's the problem, is we can have that conversation amongst ourselves and high five and say, yeah. But I don't think Middle America's there. And I know that the anti-gun people don't give a shit.
Yeah, they want to feel safe more than they want to be free. So that's outside of their.
Yeah, I think they're going to say, well, that was a different time and a different place, and it's just too easy to shoot that down with conversations we can't have or sort of distract from where we are today. You know, we are where we are today, and there are the other one there was legal precedents, right? The idea that, well, you know, according to the Heller decision and the McDonald decision, well, I don't know that resonates with Middle America, but I do know that it resonates with Middle America to say, look, we have plenty of restrictions. In fact, the federal government has recently, and more often than not, state governments and local governments over the last 20 years have overwhelmingly been relaxing restrictions that used to exist. And crime has gone down, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think in general terms, there's an argument there, but the more specific we get, the more Middle America tunes us out. The right to own guns is primarily for the purpose of defense. This is big. This was the fight that we fought in the 90s. Some of you saw the whole Recoil magazine thing in this fall that I was involved in pretty heavily in the social media. We're not going to fight this sporting purpose bullshit again. It didn't work in the 90s. It didn't work leading up to the bans in the 90s. It's a fail. We need to embrace and acknowledge, and most of the industry does a really good job of this, embracing and openly discussing the fact that firearms are primarily for the purpose of defense. This is a really important conversation to have in the coffee shops and in the stands and in your workplace. It's not about hunting. It's not about recreation. It's not about sporting. And as soon as you start caveating that and giving them that, we lose ground. Personal defense, home defense, and here's where the constitutional argument comes in. In the worst case scenario and or ultimately defense of our country. All right? And then I think presenting it that way, firearms primarily defensive tools. We're not going to make any apology for that. That's what it is. Personal defense, home defense, family defense, ultimately possibly our country's defense. It's really important. Because people don't really think China's going to invade. People don't think that Mexico and Canada are going to get together and say, let's get them. Like, I don't think it's going to happen either. I don't think the UN's going to show up and try to take over. I don't think there are FEMA camps. I don't have that going on in my head. But I do know that in the alley, when a bad guy is trying to hurt me or someone else, a firearm can help me defend myself or my family. And I also know that worst case scenario, ultimately, if things go crazy, zombies come out of the ground, whatever, it'd be great if my neighbors had some guns too. Go.
When I've called my politicians, they've come back with the assistants that answered the phone. Well, why do you need more than 10 rounds?
Oh, we're getting to that. I got a whole slide on that.
I think if you're going to cite this, and I agree it's very important, you also have to be able to correct all the misperceptions on the quoted statistics with sources. So,
but again,
you have to be able to say this is not a fig Newton of somebody's imagination that they're going to potentially be assaulted somewhere, because it happens every day, and it's not like a lightning strike. The statistics are much lower than that, and you have to be able to point them to something, because the comeback always is, well, if you own a gun, you're 40 times more to shoot yourself.
I point them to the internet. I say, look, if you go out there and don't look for the source for your piece of knowledge, right? One of the things I always try to tell people when you're arguing, goes back to that internet conversation that John and I were having earlier. I know what my argument is. I want to know what your argument is. Tell me what you're talking about. Where did that number come from? I heard it on the news. Well, have you ever heard it, go back to the whole resume thing. Have you ever heard a statistic that you found out later was wrong? Do you think possibly people choose statistics or present statistics to present their agenda? Yes. Cool. High five me. That's why I'm not going to give you statistics. Because we agree that we could both come up with numbers that would support our cause. Do you agree that if someone's trying to hurt me and I know I have a firearm and I know how to use it, I'm better off, I can better protect myself or my family because I have the firearm, because I know how to use it when the bad guy comes into my house? Get them to agree with that, right? They could say, well, what if? I get it, what if? But what if I am trained to use it? What if I do keep it in a safe? What if it's not used against me? Do you admit that under certain circumstances it could help me? Yes. Well, then let's get to those circumstances. Let's meet in the middle there somewhere, where I keep it in a safe, where I get training, where I went through a background check to get it, because that's what's required in a lot of places, and that's what responsible firearms owners do anyway. And we're going to get to that too. So here we go. There are situations where a person might need more than 7, 10, 15, whatever rounds. And my standard line in the media has been this. Yes, I can envision, and I am aware of, situations where a person would be better able to protect themselves with more than 5, 6, 7, 10, 15 rounds. Multiple person home invasions, and it's not hard to have a couple in your back pocket, somewhere in your head, from wherever your area of operations is, in your communities, in your state, in some place that someone's heard of that doesn't sound like a war zone. You can probably cite multiple person home invasions. And that if the person had been armed, if the person had had a tool with multiple round capacity, you can go all the way back to, look, we know most of the time it's going to take multiple shots to stop a bad guy. If there's multiple shots going into multiple people, then yes, we do want something like a rifle that is easier to shoot faster and control under a lot of circumstances, right? Avoid those absolutes. You need a rifle. No, you don't need a rifle, but a rifle will be better in a lot of cases. Sometimes a handgun's better. Multiple rounds is always better than single rounds. And if there's multiple attackers and I need multiple rounds, you can get to 15 real quick, right? And you can play a little game with this. You can go to what about the police? Police shoot 10, 12, 15 rounds to stop one guy at a traffic stop, right? Well, if I got 3 guys coming in my house, all of a sudden that 30-round magazine isn't even enough if I'm going to shoot as well as the local police, right? What are they going to say? The person in the coffee shop. I'm not talking about arguing with Piers Morgan. You're talking to the person in the coffee shop. You're trying to make a rational, logical argument about why round count in your gun isn't the end-all, be-all of deciding whether or not a gun is going to hurt somebody or not, because you can go that way too. Well, ultimately, if you're worried about an accidental shooting, where my kid or your kid comes into my house and takes the gun out of the closet and it miraculously falls on the ground and goes off, or they start messing with it and they shoot one of their friends, they're not going to shoot one of their friends 30 times unless they're a psychopath. The accident happens with 1 bullet in the gun. The accident doesn't happen because of a 30-round magazine. So don't even talk to me about the accident in terms of this, right? Don't talk to me about securing your weapon. Talk to me about responsible firearms ownership. Go.
What is your take on not being able to find ammo on the shelves at the moment and our guns being rendered useless?
That's a big tangent. Save that for the end.